Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing well, as I always say. And this video is going to be more of a lost video type of thing because I made it and I recorded it and then I forgot about it and lost it. So, here we are. This was supposed to be posted back in sometime around the holiday season, I assume. So yeah, it's from rural Wisconsin. So let's jump into that and thank you for watching. This happened while I was at my aunt and uncle's house in rural Wisconsin. It was late at night and I, for some reason, wasn't able to sleep. So I go outside to have a smoke, and by this time it was October, so it's pretty chilly out, but there wasn't any snow yet. It's super quiet. It's like a newish moon, so it's also very dark out. My aunt and uncle happen to live on a lot of land that is relatively uncleared. This is aside from the house and some outbuildings. Beyond that, it's all trees, and there's some trails with a big boggy patch in the middle. And again, I'm really not sleepy, so I just start wandering the property, and I take a trail out into the woods. Eventually, I come to this little outcropping with the bog before me. It's still very quiet out. I wasn't exactly scared or anything, but I got that weird feeling you get when there's eyes on you. I look around, but I couldn't find anything, and since the moon was dark, it made everything super shadowy, but besides random shadows and reeds, I don't see anything else. And then I hear laughter, but I couldn't tell if it was in my head or if it was like an actual sound, but it was very loud and very unfriendly. It was like someone made a joke at my expense and is laughing at me. And as the laughter continues, all the brush animals burst into a frenzy all around. There's dozens of birds that just get out of dodge, and they're squawking, and there's like a deer that ran out of nowhere, and I think it may have crashed through the bush or something. I stood there like a frozen idiot while the nature around me just got out of there. I soon followed suit. And I didn't sleep at all that night, obviously. So my uncle gets up with the dawn, and he finds me sitting at the kitchen table nursing a coffee. And I tell him what happened earlier, and I try to laugh about it as if I figured he wouldn't believe me. But he seems unpleasantly surprised and resigned. He stares at me for a moment and then takes a deep breath and says, "Follow me, I gotta show you something." So my uncle leads me downstairs into the cellar, and I haven't been down here in years and years. It's been so long that I don't even remember the last time I was down here. And there's this door on the far wall that I don't remember ever really seeing or paying attention to. I asked him where that's supposed to go, and he opens it, and there's just blackness. He gives me a look as he snags a lantern from a shelf by the door, and he says, "It's an old root cellar that your great-grandfather dug. Follow me." So we walk into this small square room that has a rough tunnel in the back corner. It kind of looks like a mine shaft, but it's shorter. And there's wood trusses every few feet, you get the picture. And the tunnel wasn't very long. We walk for maybe a minute, I don't really know. We come to the end of the tunnel through this rough door, and by door, I mean it's just a slab of old wood that's held in place by some cinder block along the bottom. We move it out of the way and step through it into the gray dawn. I look around, blinking in the dark from my eyes, and I'm trying to adjust to the bright light. And I realize that we're just actually a handful of yards downwind for where I stood last night overlooking the bog. We're standing there quietly when I look over at my uncle, and he's studying my facial expressions and looking at me expectantly. He says, "This is about where you were last night, yeah?" And all I can do at this point is nod. I hadn't told him where I heard the laughter. He starts telling me about how his family first settled on this land, coming all the way from Norway. Strange sounds and things had always plagued the boggy area. His grandfather, my great-grandfather, had done most of the building and clearing of the land, And then he inexplicably died shortly after digging out the root cellar. Apparently, he had been completely obsessed with finishing it and digging it out, and he had never allowed anyone else but himself to go in, not even just to grab a jar of pickles. After he died, my uncle and his brother finally went down to investigate the root cellar. That's when they found the tunnel. At this point, he motions to me to go back through the door, and we walk about halfway back up the tunnel. Here at the slight bend, he stops, and he looks at me and moves the light close to the wall. And there's this hole there that I hadn't noticed the first time on our way through. My uncle is visibly pale now and has a slight shake to his hand and asks if I want to take a look. Something in his voice tells me that I really shouldn't, but I can't resist. I peer over the rim of this hole, and it's absolutely pitch black, and the light seems to be almost like swallowed by it, but not in a normal way, in a very off-putting way, like it's not penetrating the darkness. And I think, oh shit, as I hear the same laughter again, but it's so much louder. I nearly break my neck spinning around to look at my uncle. His eyes are wide. He heard it too, so I know it's not just in my head. He seems frozen in place, and against my instincts, I decide to look again, and there's like something dimly reflecting the lantern that's almost, it feels like it's looking back at us, and then more of them show up. I stare in petrified fascination as wet, fetid air seems to leak from the hole, and there's more growling and laughter, and there's this awful stench. Something finally breaks within us, and we absolutely book it back up the tunnel and into the cellar. And I say, "What the hell was that?" And I yelled this at him as we catch our breath, by now firmly slammed the root cellar door. My uncle shakes his head. He has no idea. He says he hadn't been down in the cellar himself since the day he and his brother had first investigated and discovered that. Over the years, he had tried to convince himself that it had just been like a fantasy, like he had remembered it wrong, or things didn't quite go quite as he remembered. When I told him earlier about the laughter, it brought that fantasy crumbling down. He laughs shakily and says, "Ignorance is bliss, I guess." But he felt like he had to take me down there and show me. I agree as I stare at the thick door of the root cellar. He tells me, though, that the autopsy had ruled his grandfather's death as natural causes, but his grandmother had a different story to tell. According to her, his grandfather had been found belly up in the bog with his eyes scooped out, and no other visible injuries. Apparently the rest of the family at the time had reacted very poorly to this, but the grandmother had been the one to discover the corpse. At this moment, I recall my uncle's brother had committed suicide, but I didn't know anything more than that. I hesitantly asked him about this. He looked at me for a long while. "Yeah," he said, "he was found dead of a gunshot wound in the chest. And no eyes." After telling me this, my uncle, broke down or something. He started to cry a lot. So, after he called off work, we decided to just get blind drunk that day, and we've never spoken about that morning ever again. I gathered from some future drunken ramblings of him before I passed out that he's terrified that he'll be found dead like that one day, with his eyes gouged out. He's still alive right now, and they still live there. I don't know what I'll do if he's found like that. So, what'd you think about that story? And if you think it's real, then tell me what you think was in that hole, or what do you think the laughter was? Because I've heard legends about people coming from Norway or Ireland or whatever have you, some other countries, and they seem to bring things from the old world to the new world. They have amulets and stuff that end up having something attached to them. I'm not saying this is what that is. I just mean maybe that's something similar. I don't know. Let me know what you think down in the comments. But yeah, until the next one, thank you for watching.